Good afternoon and welcome. I'm David Feist, and I will be the facilitator of this webinar today. Our presenters are Paul Matera and Keith Mowry. Thank you for joining ANAB for our complimentary webinar on update on revision of ISO IEC 17020-2012 Committee Draft Ballot. Please note we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for viewing in the future. Some logistics before we get started. Due to the high attendance, everyone will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box. We've planned time at the end of the webinar to answer questions asked. Now, let's talk about our presenters. Paul Matera is ANAB's Senior Accreditation Manager with our 17020 program. For inspection bodies and is a U.S. expert to the ISO CASCO Working Group 31, revising ISO 17020. Paul is currently serving in the drafting group in Working Group 31 and represents ANAB on the ILAC Inspection Committee, as well as other inspection committees for other regional cooperation bodies worldwide. He has over 30 years experience in the inspection field. Now about Keith Mowry. Keith is our Senior Manager of Business Development at ANAB. He is ANAB's representative on the ANSI International Conformity Assessment Committee, ICAC, the National Mirror Committee to ISO CASCO. He has served as ICAC chair for over 20 years and has over 30 years experience with ISO standards and guides for conformity assessment. I am going to hand the presentation over to Keith at this time. Keith?
Great. Thanks so much, David. And hi, everybody. Hope everybody's having a great day. I just want to take a few minutes here at the beginning of the webinar to kind of set the place where we stand in the 17020 revision process. Paul is a member of the working group, so he has all the really good information about the kinds of revisions that are being discussed and the inside workings of that working group. But to give you an idea of where we stand, for ISO standards in general, there are 6 stages of the development or revision of an ISO standard. The first stage is the proposal stage, and the final stage is the publication stage. Those are kind of common sense, right? I mean, if you're going to do something, you have to start it and you have to finish it. There are 4 stages in between. And in the ISO IEC directives, they have a name for each of these stages: the preparatory stage, the committee stage, the inquiry stage, and the approval stage. But when you're working in ISO, what most people refer to these stages as are the kinds of drafts that are being produced in each stage. So in the preparatory stage, a working draft is being worked on and prepared. In the committee stage, a committee draft is being prepared. Then a draft international standard is prepared. And finally, a final draft international standard is prepared. So you'll commonly hear these stages referred to more in terms of the kind of draft that's being worked on. Now, of these 4 stages, only 3 are actually mandatory. The ISO IEC directives indicate that, of course, the proposal and publication stage, those are not only mandatory from a directives point of view, it's just kind of common sense. But actually, the ISO IEC directives indicate that only the draft international standard stage, the inquiry stage, that's the only mandatory stage for developing an ISO standard. So it's possible that an ISO standard can be developed and published just through this one stage. Now, what's more common in ISO CASCO is that these 3 stages in blue are the typical stages that a standard in ISO CASCO goes through. The working draft stage, the committee draft stage, and finally the draft international standard stage. So if these are the common stages used in CASCO, where are we now with 17020? Well, the title of the webinar today is the CD of 17020. So we're at the CD stage. And just to backtrack a little bit, ISO CASCO Working Group 31, where Paul is a member, that was created in early 2023 to revise 17020, and that was the creation of Working Group 31 was the end of the proposal stage. And member committees members of CASCO, national member committees of CASCO, appointed their experts to the working group, 3 per country maximum. That's kind of the new rule now in ISO CASCO. And the liaisons to ISO CASCO, organizations like IAF and ILAC, they are liaisons to CASCO. They appoint experts to the working group. And the working group then developed a number of working draft revisions of 17020. That was the working draft stage. And when and within these meetings and task groups, Working Group 31 got to a point where they had developed a working draft that they were pretty much satisfied with, that they thought was ready to go out for a committee ballot, and that was the end of the working draft stage. And so we're past that now. Now, the committee draft ballot, or the committee draft of the revision of 17020, was issued in a ballot out to the CASCO members on June 3rd, 2024, and it was open for 8 weeks. And so that ballot that was issued was the start of the CD stage. And since then, the national member bodies to CASCO and the liaisons have created and submitted their comments on the CD, and the working group is now considering all those comments and thinking about any further revisions or modifications to the CD stage. And so that's where we sit, and that's what's actually happening literally as we speak. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who's going to talk to us about some of the more significant issues that the CD ballot represented, and maybe some insights on how those might be thought about going forward. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Keith. Actually, you had one more slide, which I'll go over. So the CD is the first stage where the draft revision is balloted outside the group. We're responsible on the work group for that revision. We basically had, back from on the CD stage, we had about 1,100 comments that we're working through right now. And so that's what we're in the middle of doing right now is the work group. The drafting committee, which I'm on, is made up of the task group chairs, of which I was one, and then the conveners, which there are 3. So there's a group of about 6 or 7 people that take all of those comments, and we sort of work through them, distill them down, and then next week we have a meeting in Geneva where we're going to go back and we're going to present those comments and some of the concepts that we came up via those comments back to the working group, and then we'll work through the rest of those, and then go to the DIS stage after that. So some of the changes now, obviously, because we're in the middle of this revision, a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today are preliminary, okay? Because we're still voting, we're still wordsmithing some of the things. So we want to make sure that that's understood, that everything that we're talking about is not set in stone yet, but it's the direction we're headed. So we really just are here to give you a high level indication of what some of those changes are proposed to be. So let's start with definitions. The overall concept was to try to align the definitions with ISO 17000 2020. So the current version of 17020, which was published in 2012, and then the definitions in 17000 were updated and came out in 2020. So there is a misalignment in some instances between what's in the 2020 version of 17000 and what's in the current version of 17020. So we're going to try to align those best we can. Specifically, these impact the inspection definition, inspection systems, inspection scheme, impartiality, and appeal. Those are being updated as well. The proposal is to remove the definitions for product, process, and service. And then we've proposed to add some definitions for client, like who is the client specifically, item, items inspected, things like that, and then independence and consultancy. So those are new definitions that are not in the current version of 17020. So inspection, we changed product, process, and services to more general terms, object. The retained definition of inspection might not include a determination of conformity because as you're aware, we can inspect something, but we don't necessarily have to determine if it conforms to something else or not. There's a lot of inspection schemes out there that are for information only and are not necessarily conclude with a determination of conformity. Inspection and inspection scheme. Again, we're going to try to align those better with 17,000 and definition, and now refer to item as an item inspected. Impartiality. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but we've updated the definition for impartiality again to align with 17,000, and it's now related to the outcome of the inspection, which is a change. We've also removed references to independence as it relates to impartiality. In the new standard, you're going to see that we have split out independence and impartiality. In the current version, they were combined, and people were confusing the two concepts as the same, but they're very different. So we've updated that and tried to bring clarity to those two concepts. Appeal aligns with 17,000, where appeal ties to a decision. Inclusion in 17020 is an open question still. We're still kicking that around, but the draft version, that's what we've decided to do. Client opens this concept up to who is considered a client. The notes will be key. We've given some additional information in the notes. One of them is a note to entry that the client may not be responsible for providing the item. So clients can be different types of entities and peoples and arrangements. So we have that in there. Notes will be key to understanding who exactly the client is. So an item, anything that can be inspected, the whole population or just samples, is an open question. So when we talk about an item inspected, if you inspect a cargo ship full of grain, you sample that grain for bugs and pests and things like that, but you're accepting, or you're writing a report that's inspecting the entire cargo, right? So that's coming into play. We're also looking at what can be inspected. So look for that to be updated as well. Independence. Independence relates to a person or an organization, and also the applicability to item. It's an open question. So it's the independence that we apply in the world of inspection to an item. And how does that play into, there's a lot of discussion around how the independence is affected by the relationships between the organizations that are being inspected and who hires them and things like that, and how it relates to the item itself. Consultancy is a new term to the standard, to the 17020 standard. So it's being considered as a part of the independence requirements in Annex A, which means it should be defined. Consultancy can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, so we're trying to provide some sort of guardrail in the standard, in the to what consultancy is as it's connected with the inspection. So it's currently defined in other ISO standards, but not mentioned in 17020 previously. So we're going to do that. Also, notes have been updated to provide examples for subcontracting, outsourcing, confidence, validation, verification, and professional judgment. All right, so takes us to section 4.1, impartiality. The CD draft separates impartiality from independence to align it with Proc 33 language, which is Proc 33 is standardized text for all 17,000 standards. So you're going to see throughout the standard, they're trying to align the different standards with each other. So a lot of companies that have multiple standards that they're under, so 17020, 17025, 17065, let's say, we have a lot of companies that carry all three standards. And so ISO would like to try and align the common elements as much as possible between the standards. That way people don't have conflicting requirements. So those impartiality requirements are taken from the CASCO Proc 33, which was also done in 2020. And we took independence and we moved it to section 5 and we expanded on it in NXA. And that was a further attempt to separate the concepts of impartiality from independence. So that concept is, regardless of independence, all inspection bodies must meet the same impartiality requirements and are considered equally impartial. So in the current version of 17020, you have types A, type B, and type C. Those are independence categories, not impartiality categories. So if you're a third party or a first party inspection body, you're supposed to be impartial either way. However, you do have different independence because, if you're a first party, let's say you're an internal inspection body, let's say you're a structural steel fabricator and you have an internal in-house inspection body that inspects the things that you're building. That independence is different than a completely independent third-party inspection body that has, no relationship with the people or the things that they're inspecting. So those are just difference in independence, but everybody's supposed to be the same level of impartiality. Independence is not a contributor to impartiality, and independence requirements included to reflect their use by some markets, including regulators. So we have there's a lot of regulation in Europe and other places where that independence is baked into the regulations. So that's why we've had a lot of comments through the drafting stage that speak to that. So there's an additional sentence requiring demonstration of eliminating or minimizing threats to impartiality, but it doesn't indicate to whom the demonstration is delivered. So we're still working through those kind of details. So it's not completely clear whether the independence requirements provided are always mandatory or available for invocation by the user of the standard. So that is also something that we're still working through. There's language being considered that would require inspection bodies to carry out inspection activities in such a way as to meet the requirements of the document, the inspection body's customers, regulatory authorities, and organizations providing recognition. So that is a new requirement that's not currently laid out in the standard today. And so that could have implications as well. So independence in NXA, also there's different structures than the type A, B, and C in the current version. We're kicking around type A or a non-type A or so mentioned. So the idea there is to There was a lot of confusion of, well, what's the difference between a B and a C? There's some confusion in the comments that we received initially about the type A, and there's so many shades of gray there that the work group has settled on, just basically two types. Either you're type A, and we've defined that, given more examples, or you're not. Consultancy is now included in the Annex A independence requirements under the type A definition. Type A requirements are similar to the requirements in other 17,000 standards for bodies performing third-party conformity assessment activities. The non-type A requirements are going to be very limited. There's only two, and they're kind of similar to what the current type C requirements are. And we're just going to try to lay out what would commonly be done to meet the independence requirements. So type A and non-type A. Some of the committee draft text uses these as types of requirements and some as types of inspection bodies. So in any case, the same inspection body can meet or be a type A or non-type A for different inspection activities. It's currently that way. That hasn't changed. Contract engagements or in different conformity assessment schemes. So the idea there is you can be a type A and a type C. If you qualify for a type A as an independent third party, but you do type C activities as well, that's allowable as long as it's not the same item. So if you're an inspection body that's inspecting a building construction hired by the owner, you can't also be hired on the same building by the contractor and do both roles. So again, to type A and a non-type A, those are just placeholders. We've had a lot of great suggestions on how to name those. Type 1, type 2, just all kinds of different ways to do that. So don't get hung up on the type A and non-type A. I'm trying to come up with a better solution for that. So 5.2, requirements to define and document inspection activities for which it fulfills 17020 requirements. So not only competence, kind of scope self-defined by the inspection body, and implies that there may be inspection activities the body performs for which it does not fulfill the 17020. So, as well as activities other than inspection for which 17020 would not apply. Right now, the way it's worded, it's kind of ambiguous. So what we've done is ask that you let us know, you define what activities fall under the standard. We're being asked to consider adding additional language in 5.3 to address companies that operate multi-site inspection bodies. It's a lot more prevalent than it used to be, and currently there's not really a lot in there. So think about a company that has 50 locations, let's say, and all 50 locations are claiming accreditation. Well, if the mothership, the parent office where the quality management system is created and pushed out to all the other offices, right now there's really no requirement to make sure that there's verification in those 50 offices that everybody's doing everything in accordance with the standard, yet they're claiming accreditation. So there's language being proposed to just simply state that, hey, you need to make sure that if you're going to claim accreditation for 50 different offices, that there has to be a mechanism in place for you to make sure that that's happening. Technical management requirements are also being updated. There's an effort to separate technical management from operational management where it makes sense. So in a lot of companies you'll have, in smaller companies, you may have a technical manager that also is the operations manager, and they have that ability, right? But in other companies, your technical people may not necessarily be the best person to negotiate a contract, let's say, or deal with HR issues. In smaller companies, you kind of have to, but in larger companies, that may not necessarily be the best fit for those technical people. But the way the standard is currently written, that has been interpreted as you have to, technical management has to have responsibility over, contracting and things like that. So we just didn't feel that was appropriate. There's a lot of comments that came in regarding that. So there's an effort to allow that to be separated where it makes sense. Personnel, 2 full pages of requirements now. 1 page in 17020, 3/4 of a page in 17025. So the current version only has 1 page of requirements. We now have 2 full pages. So there's not a lot of additional substantive requirements necessarily, but there's an expansion of the current requirements, like a lot more notes, a lot more examples of what to do. There wasn't a lot of Proc 33 text that was added to 6.1, so a lot of this is stuff that is being expanded, as stated. So there's significant detail on the process for managing competence, required knowledge, types of substantiation for skipping on-site observation of personnel. So that's different. So 6.2, facilities and equipment. Again, 2 pages, so it's expansion from the current of 1 1/3 pages. There's 2 pages in 2.5 as well. There's a lot more detail on metrological traceability of equipment. So the current version is a little light in that regard. So if you're using equipment that contributes to the conformity decision, then the expectation is now that that equipment has metrological traceability. And so you'll see some similarities between 17025 and 2.0 in that regard. Externally provided services. Proposed language that may, if adopted, result in much more explicit requirements for inspection bodies to perform its own inspections, except in exceptional circumstances. Right now, the way 6.3 reads, it can be interpreted, it does say that you have to primarily do all your own inspections. That's sort of how it says. Let's see. 633, the new 633 talks about, it sort of says the same thing as the current one, where, the inspection body shall normally perform its inspections that it contracts to undertake. But where it departs is it now talks about use of external service providers for part of the inspection or the entire inspection is only possible in exceptional circumstances, such as, and then it lists out a bunch of stuff, some of the same stuff it currently lists out. But that difference in language and how it's worded could create situations where the expectation by regulators is that it's less desirable to have wholesale contract inspectors out there. And I know there's places in the world, South America and Europe too, where there's unionized inspectors where inspection bodies draw from a pool of 100 different inspectors. So this new language may impact that a little bit. So we'll see. We are still debating that language as well. Depending on how it's interpreted by accreditation bodies and regulators, it may impact the current practice as stated. All right, contracts, review of request tenders and contracts. There's a new section which replaces 715. It adds more requirements for making sure the inspection bodies and customers have properly defined the work and the inspection body is competent to carry it out. Borrows from 2.5, including structure, but no requirements or content on decision rule. And there's a few more prescriptive requirements in 7.1 than there are in 7.2.5. Inspection records. So there's a combination of requirements from the current 2.0 and the current 2.5 for the content of the records. The control and retention of the records is moved into management system. So section 8, the new section 8.3, we documented information, so that's a bit of a change. And then the documented information portion is a mandated heading per Proc 33, but the content under the heading is not mandated. So, and it's not a lot of additional stuff. So there's not a lot of change here, but it is in a different section. So appeals and complaints, they're now 2 separate clauses. It is Proc 33 text, both of them, and it is intended to align with other 17,000 series documents. Now, 17025 has no section on appeals. So there is a question right now that's being debated on why does an inspection body need requirements for appeals? The lab does not. That's a good question. But ISO CASCO in its wisdom decided that it's Proc 33 text, so it will likely stay. Management system, so getting to section 8, there's no more option A and B, which is a surprise to some people. The new language says an inspection body may meet 8.1.2 by establishing, implementing, and maintaining a quality management system. Example given in accordance with the requirements of ISO 9001. This quality management system shall support and demonstrate the consistent fulfillment of the requirement of ISO 17020. So that's different than what it currently says, where it essentially says, if you have ISO 9001, you already meet the requirements of section 8 and 2.0. That's not true. So that's a change. So that may impact some inspection bodies. The structure is different from 2.5, but there is significant content overlap. And again, that's an attempt to align the standards so companies that have multiple standards in their management system don't have to have multiple quality manuals and really different conflicting requirements. Actions to address risks and opportunities replaces preventative actions. The types of risk and opportunities is unclear. I don't really go into that too much. So the improvement heading and requirements are not mandated by Proc 33. So we had 1,029 comments received on the CD, which are going to be considered. We've been considering them in the drafting group, and then we've consolidated those, and we're going to present those to the full working group next week. So any needed changes are made to the document and consensus on one of the following next steps. So either the revised draft is so significantly altered that another CD, CD2, would be needed to gather national body comments in the fourth quarter of this year. But it's really uncommon for that to happen. The revised draft is not so significantly altered that it can progress to the DIS stage, which is the normal item in CASCO. And based on what I'm seeing in the drafting group and the chatter I'm seeing in the work group, we're not thinking that it's going to need to go to another CD stage. So if you're a Benton person, I'm thinking it's not going to be needed. So the DIS stage will ask for a vote, approve or disapprove, and comments from the national bodies. So Keith will receive this, and him and his cronies on the ICAC in the US will vote on it to approve or disapprove it. CASCO ballots on documents almost always are approved. There's one exception, and approved DIS can be used as a rationale to not adopt comments that significantly alter the draft. Keith, would you like to jump on and comment on this?
Yeah, sure, Paul. Happy to. And my first thing I have to do is apologize to Paul because he's right. I skipped the slide that I was supposed to talk about at the beginning. It must have been because I was so excited to hear what Paul had to say about the CD of 17020. Well, that's my excuse anyway, and I'm sticking with it. So really at this point, this slide, what we're talking about is, okay, what happens next? Like Paul said, if there's the unusual option of a second committee draft ballot, a CD2, then this exact cycle that we're just finishing up, it gets repeated. Another CD ballot goes out, comments are solicited, a bunch of comments are provided, and the working group then, digests and works through all those comments, just like the cycle that they're in the middle of now. But like Paul said, that's not really very common. The more common next step in CASCO is the draft progresses to a draft international standard ballot or a draft international standard stage. Now, at the CD level, where we are now, there's actually no vote. There is no vote to say how many countries approve a CD and how many countries disapprove a CD and how many countries abstain. It's literally just a big load of comments, like Paul mentioned, 1,029 different comments. And so at the DIS stage, the big difference is, in addition to comments that are submitted on a DIS ballot, there are actual votes. Individual countries will say, we approve this as a draft international standard, or we disapprove. Well, you can imagine that you get a whole range of possibilities, right? You can have a huge oversized majority of members almost unanimously saying, this is great, we approve it. You can have something that's a little closer, right? Where there's maybe a majority that approves, but there's a sizable number of members that don't approve, and everything in between. As Paul mentioned, typically every CASCO ballot is approved, but it makes a difference by how much and the size of the majority, because if there's a really, really big majority of the votes in favor, votes to approve a draft international standard, that can be, it's not necessarily, but it can be taken as a signal, hey, this draft international standard is really pretty good as it is. And so if you've got a very large number of CASCO members that vote in favor and perhaps don't submit too many comments in addition to voting in favor, that can be a signal to the working group to say, this is really pretty much done. You've pretty much got it. And it's allowable under the ISO IEC directives that in that case, that draft international standard that was balloted can go directly to publication. It doesn't need to go through any more ballots. It doesn't need to go through any more commenting. But this next DIS stage is a little tricky, because what happens if you don't have a real clear message from the CASCO members from the ballots? What happens if you get a kind of a slim majority that approves and you get a substantial number of comments? Well, now you're kind of in a chicken and egg situation, like the first box on the slide here shows. On the one hand, if you rely on the DIS vote that approved it, you could sit back and say, well, maybe we need to be a little bit cautious about making any significant changes because we got an approval from the majority of the CASCO members. On the other hand, you could take a look at the comments and you could sit back and you say, wow, there's still a lot of issues. There's still a lot of significant feedback that we're getting on this draft. And yeah, we got an approval by a majority, but man, look at the relevance and the significance of all these comments. And so this is where the wisdom and the experience of the leadership of the working group comes into play, especially the convener and the CASCO Secretariat staff folks that are moving this work along. And so that's an unknown at this point. As Paul mentioned, he's seeing the tea leaves that the next ballot that we get will likely be a draft international standard ballot, right? And so what I've just described is going down that path, and the fact that depending on the results of that draft international standard ballot, you might see a published revision to 17020 that looks very, very much like that DIS that's balloted. It really depends on the votes, the comments, and how the working group leadership chooses to interpret those results. And in that particular case, you can see in that particular case, right, where the DIS gets balloted and it gets approved in such a way that it then goes straight to publication. In that particular scenario, the CD ballot, which has just completed, turns out to be the only real significant opportunity to influence the content of that standard. Because when the DIS gets balloted and goes straight to publication based on ballot results, really the only bite at the apple that everybody had was the CD. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. I'm not complaining and I'm not criticizing. That's not the point. I'm just pointing out that that's the ISO process as it now exists. And what it really says is you know pay attention at that CD level, because even though you're not voting, depending on how things play out, it may be your primary or principal and only way to submit, meaty, substantive comments about the content of the standard. What this all boils down to is stay tuned, right? Stay connected into the 17020 process, especially you folks who are on the webinar today, who are responsible for fulfillment of that standard, understanding it, explaining it to your organization, managing fulfillment and demonstrating fulfillment in a variety of ways, including accreditation, of course. It means stay tuned and stay connected as best you can. And what I will provide to you is a pledge from ANAB that we will continue to give you the information in a timely and complete way, so that when you actually purchase and see the revised 17020, it won't be as big of a surprise, and you won't be coming at it cold, if you will. So that kind of brings us to the end of the webinar and the comments we wanted to provide today. David, I think Paul and I can answer some questions, so let's go there.
Perfect. Thank you, Keith Mowry and Paul Matera. What a great presentation. And as you said, it is our commitment at ANAB to make sure that we give you as up-to-date information as possible. And having these two individuals who are heavily involved is our best way of doing that. So we've had a number of questions that have come through, and we're going to get to those after we discuss some additional resources available for accredited laboratories or inspection bodies or groups that want to be accredited. So as we look at this, we have, hang on a second. The webcasts that we have are free. They're pre-recorded videos providing additional information. The webinars like you're attending today are free live informational sessions that we offer monthly on topics that are of interest to the accreditation community. And we place these all on our website so that you can go back and refer to them in full at any time. We have a blog page that has a wealth of information related to risk, accreditation, standard requirements, a lot of other topics. And we offer live, online, in-person, and self-paced training in many areas, including internal auditing, inspection, standard requirements, measurement confidence, and risk analysis. So all of these resources can be found on the ANAB website at anab.ansi.org. Now let's get to the fun part. Let's get to your questions. So we've had quite a few things come in. One of the questions we have is, did the terms product, process only change, or are all other items of the definition being changed? For example, design, service, etc.
Thanks, Hamza, for that question. The terms product, process only change. So it was removed. I'm not sure I completely understand the question. Other items of the definition are changed. So a lot of the definitions were updated, and some were added, some were removed and changed. So let's see here. But those items in particular, remove product, process, and service, were completely taken out of the standard.
Right, and if I can add to that,
Yeah.
where the 2012 version explicitly defined the term product, defined the term process, defined the term service. I think this is what the question is about. And what Paul has clarified is those haven't been revised, they've been taken out. The CD draft of the revised 17020 has none of those terms and none of those definitions. So what does that mean? Well, the term product is defined in ISO AEC 17000 2020, and 17020 refers to 17,000. So you get the definition and term for product over there. As far as process and service, I would expect that the CD of 17020 never uses those two words, right? And so there's no purpose for a term and definition in the standard. Like all other ISO standards, in those cases, if those words happen to be used, then you can assume a dictionary definition, or you can pick up a definition from any other ISO standard that you want to use.
Okay, thank you. There are a number of comments related to the committee draft and how it is certain limited circulation versus the DIS being a stage of public comment. Would you care to comment on those?
Yeah, that's kind of an ISO process question. I'll be happy to take that. From my perspective, as a member of the U.S. National Committee to CASCO, as a member of that committee, both the CD ballot and the DIS ballot look and feel the same. We as a National Mirror Committee and as individual members, we get the CD, we get the copy of the CD, we get the copy of the DIS. The only difference, and we create our individual comments on both. We feed those back into the ANSI-ICAC, the National Mirror Committee. All of the comments at that national level get combined and rationalized, meaning we don't have duplicates and we don't have comments that are fighting each other. And that looks exactly the same at both the CD and the DIS level. And the distribution of the CD and the DIS documents is exactly the same. It goes to the ISO CASCO individual members. Now, those individual members can, if they wish, within the constraints of ISO copyrights and so on and so forth, they can cast a net, right? They can go out and they can engage with any number of other individuals they wish within their organization. Some folks go out and try to solicit input and ideas from a very broad range of individuals outside other organizations as well. That's really up to the individual CASCO member, literally individual person, in terms of how they do that. So from my perspective as a National Mirror Committee member, the DIS and the CD are distributed the same way. And the feedback that I give as an individual, and I gather input from others as well, but the input I give looks the same on the CD and the DIS level. The only difference is at the DIS level, I have to propose a vote to approve, disapprove, or abstain. Now, it's at the working draft level, right? That's where there's what Paul just got done with over the past couple of years. Those working drafts of a revision, those are only circulated within the CASCO Working Group. I, as a member of a National Mirror Committee, I never see those. They never get distributed out to the National Mirror Committees. They never get solicited for comments to the National Mirror Committees. So there, between the working draft stage and the committee draft stage, that's where there's a very big difference in who sees the draft and who comments on it.
Perfect. There's a follow-on to that. Could you just explain the difference between the FDIS and the publication? Because that wasn't really fully explained.
Yeah, sure. That's a process question. I'll do that. So if an FDIS stage is used, okay, then there is literally an FDIS version of the revised document that goes out for ballot. I mean, but we just got done talking about the CD version that has been balloted, and Paul's looking at all the 10,000 comments that came in on that. There will be a DIS version of the revised 17020. The national mirror committees will all get that and comment and vote, approve or disapprove on that. There can be yet again a third version, an FDIS version. That's an actual document that looks like a revision of the document. It gets sent to the national mirror committees and so on and so forth. Now that's the last stage. So you would think, well, if the FDIS is the last stage, then why do we have something called the publication stage? Well, because after the FDIS stage is done, meaning it's approved, because if the FDIS is not approved, then we're at risk of the whole thing falling apart and nothing getting done. But once the FDIS is approved, that language in the FDIS version of the document is not necessarily exactly what gets published. There's a function within ISO. They're called, they're affectionately called the ISO editors. And there are certain kind of rules and norms for ISO standards across the board. And the FDIS can get formatted, not much, not very little change, and reworded just a smidge based on the work of those ISO editors. And so the process of taking the FDIS, which is approved, and really just maybe a little polish and a little tweak here and there, and literally maybe cleaning up the bibliography or page numbering, that kind of thing, that's the publication stage. And then the publication stage ends when literally it's published and it's available for purchase.
Okay. Paul, there's a question that seems to relate to you. You mentioned inspection without determination of conformity. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's just that. I can inspect an item or be contracted to do an inspection on something and not have to determine that it's in conformance with something or not. It can just simply be an inspection, and the reporting is an expert opinion back that it looks okay. It's kind of in line with what we would normally see for that given object of inspection, item inspected. But we're not saying it fails or passes something. So of course, many inspections are exactly that. You have a criteria. In 17025, a decision rule. You have something that you're comparing it against. Is that thing in accordance with GAFTA requirements or the customer specifications or the building code or whatever it is you're looking at? So that's a conformity decision that is a result of the inspection, but there's many times where that's not required. So that's really all that's talking about.
All right, I think we have time for one additional question here. For multi-site inspection bodies, what if some sites are type A and some are non-type A with common management systems? Is ILAC thinking of developing guidance on multi-sites in the future?
So we're going to have to. I'm also on the ILAC P15 committee, and actually I believe Hamza is as well. So yeah, once this standard is revised, there's a lot of work that the ILAC P15 committee is going to have to come up with, because the current P15 is a comment on the 2012 version. So anything we add new, anything that we add, ILAC is absolutely going to have to be involved. ILAC does have a liaison on the committee, on the work group. A big overriding mission of the work group was to try to align the new 17020 with ILAC P15 as much as possible. So the goal was to actually eliminate the need for P15, to try to be as clear as possible, but that didn't happen. So we got a lot of the P15 stuff into the new version, but there's still things that didn't make it in for various reasons. So we're going to have to redo P15 once the new standard is finalized. Hamza, your question about multi-site inspection bodies, though, is a good one, because there are cases where you categorize an inspection body as a type A or non-type A in this case. But if they have multiple sites, multiple locations that are also accredited, and sometimes they do non-type A type work, are they still a type A, right? So that kind of goes back to the same concept that a type A can also do non-type A work. So how is the inspection body primarily going to be categorized? And then are they allowed to do other types of work? So the standard, the way it's currently written, well, the way it will be written is there is the ability to do that. It says that you can do both. You just can't do them on the same item. That is a pretty hot topic, though, in the work group because not everybody has that view. So some countries don't feel that if you consult on how to build Volkswagen cars, that you can also be the inspector. But other countries are like, well, the fact that you consult on design makes you an expert, and so you would be able to inspect those. You just can't do it for the same company at the same time, right? Like example I gave earlier. So hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. Paul and Keith, what an informative webinar. We truly appreciate your time. If you would like additional information about training offered by ANAB, you can contact us at training@anab.org. If you have questions about accreditation or the services ANAB provides related to accreditation, contact anab@anab.org. And finally, if you need a quote for accreditation services, contact Roger Muse at rmuse@anab.org. All right. Thank you, everyone. That concludes today's webinar. Have a good day.